Hi students, this week we are going to be learning more about the water cycle and we're going to be tying it together with weather and climate. So when you get to the first page, make sure that you open up your guided notes and you take those for the module exam and the quiz this week. When you get to the first slide, you are going to watch this video and it's going to tell you a little bit about the water cycle. But before we get too much into the water cycle, I want to explain to you all of the different parts of the water cycle because you may have seen some new ones that you didn't see in elementary school. So we're going to hop over to a PowerPoint to do that. So the water cycle has many different parts. The first part that we're going to look at is evaporation. And evaporation happens when water changes from a liquid to a gas. So if you remember in the terrarium experiment, that water disappeared from the lake because it evaporated. And this is the way that water moves from the liquid state on Earth back into water vapor as part of the water cycle. But things don't always just evaporate from lakes and oceans and puddles on Earth. There's also something called transpiration, and that is the evaporation of groundwater by plants through their leaves. So this is another way that water vapor can be returned to the atmosphere. So once that water vapor gets to the atmosphere, it's going to be stored there and transported around the globe. So this is how we get different storm systems in different areas. And it involves both condensation and precipitation here. So condensation is the process by which water vapor in the air is changed into liquid water. And this will form clouds and also fog. So in our terrarium experiment, if you started to see some water droplets collecting on the top of this saran wrap or the plastic wrap, that is the process of condensation. And we learned about precipitation last week. So we know that it's rain, snow, freezing rain, sleet, and hail. And these are all going to be formed in clouds. And when water is released from these clouds, it can happen in these different forms of precipitation. So next we have something called runoff. And runoff is the precipitation that did not get absorbed into the soil or evaporate. We also have something called infiltration, and this is the downward process of moving water from the land into the soil or porous. So that means it has holes in it, just like pores on your face, porous rock. And once it's infiltrated into the ground, we have something called groundwater. And this is large amounts of water stored in the ground. And this is also a lot of times where plants will get their water from through their roots. So these are the main parts of the water cycle that you're going to need in order to be successful. So your textbook thinks that there are 4 main elements of the water cycle, because even though you'll see all of the vocabulary words that we just discussed on this diagram, your textbook wants you to focus on transpiration. So that's going to be the evaporation out of plants, evaporation, precipitation, and condensation. So those are going to be the main ones that you should be focusing on. So the water cycle has the ability to really affect weather and climate. So let's think of this. Back in a couple lessons, we learned about the different types of climate zones. So we're going to look at 3 types of climate zones. So think about the tropical climate zone. One of the characteristics of a tropical climate zone is that there's a lot of rain. So we know that the water cycle is going to probably be more active in a tropical region. You're going to have more precipitation. But then if you look at either a dry climate or a polar climate, both of those are characterized as not having a lot of precipitation. So in those polar climates, you're probably not going to get a ton of snow or sleet or hail or freezing rain. And in that desert or dry climate, you're probably also not going to get a lot of precipitation. So that is one way that the water cycle can affect climate. But then think of the day to day. So when it rains outside, that's going to be the way that the water cycle can affect the weather. If it's foggy outside and you can't see, that's going to affect the weather. If it snows, that's going to affect the weather. So here it's going to be really important that you guys know the difference between weather as a snapshot in time, but then climate as an average overall prediction of the area. So the water cycle can also have some negative impacts on human life. So one way is a hurricane. So hurricanes are really destructive. Another way is strong winds. So if there's really, really strong winds, it can knock things over and cause damage as well. A storm surge is when water is pushed on shore by severe winds during a hurricane. So even though hurricanes can be devastating, storm surges can be just as bad, if not worse, than the hurricane itself. Sometimes we will also get tornadoes, and tornadoes are also accompanied by strong thunderstorms. So both of those natural events can be devastating. And finally, wildfires. So you guys may have remembered in the news out west in California, there's usually a lot of wildfires, but they can also happen on the East Coast. So if we have too many things that can light the brush on fire, the wildfires have the ability to move very quickly and impact a lot of different areas negatively. When you guys go to take the quiz this week, you will be asked about how one of these separate events can impact human life and affect human life. So maybe you just want to practice and jot down in your notes a couple points from each of these different types of natural disasters and how they could affect humans, and have those ready to go in your notes. So with all of these natural disasters, we also have to have ways to protect ourselves. So some ways that we can protect ourselves is by making a family communication plan. So this is putting together names and numbers and addresses of close family members just to make sure that everyone's accounted for. It may also have a map where you guys know that you can all meet if something were to happen. And you can also have an emergency kit. So these are going to be filled with non-perishable food, water, and other supplies that can help you for at least 3 days or 72 hours. Some other things that aren't here that you may want to put in your emergency kit would be maybe a first aid kit, maybe a flashlight with some extra batteries. But this isn't going to be the time that you're going to prioritize your iPad or your phone or your gaming system. These are going to be only things that you're going to need to survive, not things that you just want. So one thing that's going to be important if there is bad weather is that you stay informed of weather events by listening to weather updates. This can be on the TV, through the internet, online, you can read it, or maybe even turning on a radio. And finally, when there are directions to seek shelter or evacuate or avoid certain places, it's going to be important that you take those directions seriously in order to keep you safe. So when you get to the end of the lesson, make sure you open up the Talk Like a Scientist, and it's not that long this week, to be able to copy these into your notes. This week we have a quiz. It's going to have 2 short answer questions. So just make sure that you're ready, and when you take it the first time, wait for your instructor so you can get some feedback. Good luck.